was 22 years old when I came to prison.
I was 30 years old when I went to prison.
I was at the age of 19. I had just turned 19.
Hi, I'm Chris, and I help life-sentenced men transition from institutionalized prison life back into society. Every one of our men has already served 25 to 45 years in prison. I serve on the board of the Corrections Transition Program at Everglades Correctional Institution in Miami, Florida. I teach these men life skills and how to speak, listen, and think, so when they get paroled, they become assets to their communities rather than liabilities of the state. Welcome to Men Going Home. I'm Chris Wolf, and we've got another great show for you today because we are the only show that brings you access to a segment of society very few people know anything about. Men who have spent more than 30, 35, and even 40 years in prison. We'll talk to them about their crimes, their life in prison, and what their transition back into the free world was like after all those years. Now, usually at this point, we welcome my good friend and host of this show, Andy Corge. However, Andy and his lovely wife, Rebecca, are traveling this week to the Southwest. They're in Arizona and Southern California. I believe Sebastian actually has some pictures that we can pull up on the screen. Andy will be back on June 1st, and we welcome his return. Last week's show with Richard Jackson was an unbelievable show about a family man with a wife and two sons who was sent to prison for life for a murder he did not commit. Richard Jackson received a life sentence and spent 25 years in prison because a friend he was with at a bar in Winter Haven, Florida, shot and killed an off-duty police officer. And in many ways, Richard was guilty by association. To see that episode with Richard Jackson and many more compelling stories, please go to The Man Live on YouTube and Facebook, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get this show on the road and introduce today's special guest. Today's special guest was convicted of first-degree murder in 1988 at the age of 21. He was sentenced to life in prison and spent over 31 years in Florida's most violent prisons. He is here today to tell his true, compelling story. Please welcome today's special guest, Anthony Venezia. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Chris. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
Our pleasure. Anthony, very interesting. I met you several years back at the Corrections Transition Program at Everglades Correctional Institution, and we always knew you as Tony. You don't go by Tony anymore. It's Anthony, and I find it a very positive thing that you did. Talk about that.
Well, Chris, in prison I made a decision that Tony had gotten me in trouble for many years. Tony's lived a troublesome life, and when I made the point of changing my life around and the decision, I decided I want to go with my given name, Anthony.
Sayonara, Tony.
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome to the show, Anthony. Anthony, you were actually born not far from this studio. You were born at Doctors Hospital in Coral Gables in 1967, and you were raised in the Coral Reef neighborhood of Southwest Miami-Dade until the age of 13.
Yes, sir.
What do you remember about your early years up until that point in time?
Well, I remember having bleached blonde hair, swimming, good times. I remember being under my brother, always being around with him, driving around, spending time with my sisters, family, going to the Keys. We had a trailer in the Keys that we used to go to, spending a lot of time outside in the sun.
Were you a good student?
I struggled a little bit in my school. I actually went to a reading clinic here in not far from here, and I struggled some.
Did you like school?
Yes and no. I mean, I liked it because there was kids there, there were friends there, but the academic part was a struggle for me, yes.
Mm-hmm. You had a little issue with attention?
Yes, my attention span was very short or long if I was on something that interests me.
I believe you attended Vineland Elementary School, and then once you hit 6th grade, you attended F.C. Martin?
Yes, sir.
And then in 1980, you were 13 years old. Your family moved to Deltona, Florida. That's up in Volusia County?
Yes, sir. Up there in Volusia County by Daytona.
Why did your family move?
I really don't know. I mean, I was 13 and just before my 13th birthday. I'm not really quite sure. I guess a slower life. It was more countryist up there. Changed from my father, my family. I don't really know.
Well, what did your father do for a living down here in Miami?
He's done a little bit of everything. He was a car salesman most of my life. He's sold vehicles most of my time.
And how about your mother?
He was a correctional officer at one time prior to us leaving.
So he was a correctional officer here in South Miami-Dade?
Yes, sir.
And then when you moved to Deltona, did he have a job waiting for him there?
No, he ended up going into real estate.
Okay.
And then opening a real estate business.
All right. And did your mother work for a living?
No, she was a housewife.
Interesting story. You said your mother they met in New York, correct? Your mother was of Puerto Rican descent. Your father was of Italian descent. We have a real-life West Side story, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, I believe the first 13 years of your life, you said your father, and you remember that your father was a functioning alcoholic. He drank a lot for the first 13 years of your life.
That is correct.
Talk
yes.
about that.
Well, there was a lot of trouble in my younger years. I remember that.
Was there conflict in the house because of his drinking?
Yes, there was. I mean, we had Christmases where he was passed out.
Mm-hmm.
There was some domestic violence in the house. He never hit my mother or anything like that.
Kids were fair game.
Yeah.
No spouses.
I was fair game, but I mean, I kind of caused a lot of it myself, though. I was a little bit of a troublesome guy at that age.
And how about your brothers and sisters? How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I've got a brother 15 years older than me. I've got two sisters. One's 10 years older than me, and the other one's 5 years older than me.
What is it? Every 5 years, your parents decide to have a child? Yeah, you're the youngest at 54, and then you got a 59 age sister, and a 64-year-old sister, and a 69-year-old brother.
That's correct.
Are they all? They're all still living?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Are you all close with them?
I'm very close with them. It was actually their support that kept me grounded through my incarceration.
Well, I believe one sister in particular was vital to your parole, correct? I mean, we're talking bottom of the ninth inning, and she was helping you.
Yes, she was at the last, she was right there. She pulled some strings, yeah.
All right, so now you're age 13, you're living in Deltona. Tell people, where is Deltona? It's south of Orlando?
It is, no, actually, it's southwest of Daytona Beach. It's right between Daytona Beach and Altamont Springs in Orlando. So
it's close to the ocean?
25 miles, yeah. I did a lot of time going to the beach during my teenage years.
And you attended DeLand High School?
Yes, sir.
Public school. Were you having trouble at school, or were you back to being a good student?
Actually, at that time, I was able to do the work, but I was not doing the work.
Why?
I had my mind on other things. I had my mind on just not school.
You were skipping class, I believe.
Yes, sir.
And there was no consequences for skipping class?
Well, I kind of became a professional at that. There was, if you miss a certain amount of days, you drop a letter grade. If you tardy a certain amount of time, you'd drop a letter grade. And I used to go to the dean's office, get a pass, and have another guy come get me out of class, so I was an excused absence.
Right.
So, yeah.
You knew the system.
I at a young age.
However, you knew the system, but at age 17, you decided to drop out. You're a junior in high school. You drop out of school. Why did you drop out?
Well, I was failing, and I didn't want to have to face my family.
Did your parents know you were dropping out?
No, I mean, I was not really the most obedient child. For some reason, at the age 17, I thought I was grown, and I didn't understand why I had to abide by my father's rule under his household. And at the age of 17, I said, well, I can legally leave, and I did.
So you moved out at 17. What was their reaction?
That's the funny thing about it. As a child, as a 17-year-old kid, I was hoping, I don't know, maybe they would try to stop me, but
they didn't. So you wanted to be stopped.
It's possible that I wanted to be stopped. I think I look back now, and I think that's what I was looking for, and I was really calling their bluff, and me being hard-headed, my father being hard-headed, it didn't work out well.
So you moved to Atlanta. You're 17 years old. You move to Atlanta, and you move in with your sister and brother-in-law.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and what was that about? What were you going to do?
Well, I was up there. I was working. I was for about 8 months, and then my brother-in-law and sister moved back to Florida, so I stayed up there. I had a pretty decent job, but again, I was just not living the right life.
You were working
crazy.
in a warehouse of some like
McKesson Drugs.
right, a generic drug manufacturer. But now one night you run out of gas in your car.
Yes, sir.
And you don't lock the doors, so you go to look for some gas. So you get back to your car, and the police are looking for you.
Well, the police
they're
was
waiting
there,
for you.
and they were. He waited till I put the gas in the car, and as I was putting the gas in the car, he told me, "You're under arrest."
What for?
Marijuana under an ounce. There was residue in a glass pipe in the car.
But you weren't high at the time. They just found this pipe that you had used at some point in time, and there was marijuana residue in it?
Correct.
All right, so what happens to you?
I went to the county jail. My sister had told me if I ever got arrested, don't call her. And so I waited till like 7 in the morning, and I called her anyway. And so she ended up bonding me out, and I got bonded out. And then a month later, I went to court for it. My mother came up from Florida and went to court with me, and I had to pay a $500 fine.
And that was it.
And that was it.
So then you leave Atlanta. You move back to Deltona.
Yes, I moved back to Deltona.
Why did you move back to Deltona?
Well, I wasn't.
You had nowhere else to go.
I had nowhere else to go.
Because your sister didn't want you living with her anymore.
Well, she had moved back to Florida at that time.
Okay. So you had nowhere to live.
And I was living in a spot, but I had nowhere to live. So I was going back home.
So now you move back to Deltona. You're 18, 19 years old.
19.
Right. So you're dating women. You're not used to coming home at midnight like you did when you were in high school. And you're starting to have some problems at home, correct?
Correct.
So you move. Well, you move out at this point. Yeah, you're 19. Because you got a job. You're working at the Long John Silver restaurant. You're 19 years old, correct?
Yes. I was dating 3 different women, and I was out late, partying, whatever. And my father finally came to me and said, called me one night and said, "Listen, you're under my roof now. You do it. You're gonna be home on time." And I'm like, "I'm not doing anything wrong." So he was a little upset. I had different women calling the house at different times, and so I turned around and made a decision. I moved out, and I moved in with one of the girls that I was dating at the time.
Right. This is December of 1986. You had been working at the Long John Silver restaurant, and you start dating a woman named Sharon, who's the manager of the restaurant, correct? Yes. Now, she's 14 years older than you, correct? So once you start dating, you couldn't work there anymore.
Right.
That was the company policy.
Right.
But you move in with Sharon, correct?
Yes, sir.
And she had 2 daughters?
Yes.
How old were they?
One was about 5 years older than me. The other one was about 7 years older than me. Younger than me.
So what was that like? You're now living with somebody for the first time. She's 14 years older than you. She's got 2 daughters that are younger than you, but not all that much younger than you. What was that like?
Stressful. I didn't realize it at the time. I thought I could handle it at the time. It was really stressful. I was actually like living in a married life at age 19, and thought I was grown, and really wasn't, and I was doing what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do it, and
so in about December of 1987, you start to, you thought the relationship was okay, but I guess she didn't, and you start to suspect that she may be seeing somebody else, correct?
That's true.
So what happened?
Well, a couple times when I went to where she was working, Long John Silver, which I did often, and I walked in, and there was a guy sitting in a booth. And I mean, it wasn't uncommon to see her with, guests and stuff, customers. But this one time I walked in and I seen something and I kind of felt something. I didn't quite sure. I knew who it was because prior to that I had gone to
like a water softener demonstration.
Right. They were selling
and he
water.
was there.
And he was there. It was at his house.
Coincidentally, right.
Yeah. And so I've just felt something. So I questioned her about it, and she's like, no, nothing, like it was nothing. So I said, okay. And then later on down the road, I found out it was actually true.
So you had walked in to see her and have lunch where she works, and she's having this conversation with this guy, and you feel, I just interrupted something.
Right. He had got up and left, and she got up and got behind the counter, and the movement just made me feel something,
Yeah, it's amazing how perceptive people can be. So, but now, coincidentally at this time, this is, let's say January 1988, your grandfather was actually, he was murdered in his condominium, correct?
Yes, sir.
What happened?
Still an unsolved mystery. I don't really know. I was not living at the house. I was living with Sharon, and I know that they found him they stole his necklace. He had a medallion. They stole his car. My uncle found him in his condominium with the back of his head bashed in, and they never resolved it.
It was just a robbery, and they killed him?
That's what they said. Yeah.
Apparently, because when I was researching your interview, apparently there were 2 women and 2 men they were looking for, but nothing ever came of it. It was an unsolved murder.
Nothing.
June of 1988, so 5 months after your grandfather's murdered. In June of 88, your suspicions about Sharon are confirmed. Talk about that.
Well, I went out with my boss at the time. I was a foreman for an irrigation company, Sunbelt Irrigation, and my boss wanted to take his boat out, so he needed someone to help him put it in the water and everything. So we went out on the boat, and she was going out with her girlfriend, and that night I felt a little uncomfortable, something in my spirit. And so when I came in with my boss, I went home, and nobody was at the house. Her daughters weren't there. She wasn't there.
You come home, the house is dark, nobody's home.
Right.
Was that unusual?
Yeah, there's always somebody there, So this particular night, I know that in the past she usually leaves little notes on her daughter's phone, so I happened to go look at the phone, and it says something about call his house, let the phone ring once.
Call his house.
Yeah, that's what it said, quote unquote, call his house, let the phone ring once, I'll call you back. So I didn't know who his house was, but in my mind, immediately, the individual that was at the restaurant popped in my mind, and that was Rodney Wood.
Rodney Wood.
And I went to the phone book, looked up his phone number, and I called the number, let it ring once, hung up, and she called back.
And when she called back, what did she say?
She said, Angel. I said, no, Tony. And then she hung up.
That was it. She hung up. She knows she's busted. You're right. So she hangs up. So now what do you do?
Well, I drove over there.
That night?
Yes, sir.
You go to Rodney Wood's house?
Yes, sir.
And what happens?
I drove over there, and then I went to his front door. It was pitch black. I knocked on the door. He came to the door. I said, I'd like to speak to Sharon. He says, Sharon don't want to talk to you. That's why I just need to speak to her. He said, no, get off my property before I call the police. I said, okay. I got in my car. I went back to the house, and I waited. I called a couple more times. Nothing happened. The next morning, I went to work.
So she never came home, and you went to work you were doing at Sunbelt Irrigation.
Yes.
So you just go to work. Okay, she didn't come home. Meanwhile, all right. So you go to Sunbelt Irrigation the next day. You come home from work, and then what?
I come home from work and the house is locked up. I didn't have any keys because when I moved in with her, we never had kept the house locked up, and I never had no keys anyway. So I get there, all my stuff's in there, all my belongings that I had accumulated over the year and a half that we were together, almost 2 years, and she wouldn't. She was gone. Her daughters were there, and they wouldn't let me in. I'm like, let me get my stuff. So that's when I went over to my parents.
So she's actually, I mean, not in a very diplomatic way. So she's basically kicked you out now that you found out she's been cheating on you.
Yeah.
Her daughters won't open the door to let you in. You can't get your stuff. You're sort of stuck.
Right.
So now you say you go to your parents' house,
Yeah.
and you just stay there?
I spent a night there, and then I went to work the next day, and then that's when I went to Rodney's house to confront him.
Okay, so you stayed at your parents one night, and then the next day you went to Rodney's house?
Yes.
Okay, now it's June 28th of 1988. So you go, at this point, I got to think you're pretty upset. You're pretty mad.
I was going through a lot of emotions, yes.
Would you call it rage?
I would probably say yes.
Did you ever think just to call the police and say, hey, I've been living with this woman for a year and a half. I can't get my stuff?
Never even dawned on me.
Yeah. So you go to Rodney's house, and on June 28th, and what happens?
Well, I went up there, and he came home, and we had a little confrontation right there in his driveway, and he pushed me. I hit the back of his bumper, so I went to my car, and that's
wait a minute. Wait. So you go up to his house. Was he there when you got there, or were you waiting for him?
When I got to the house, he wasn't there. When I got to my car, he was pulling up.
Okay.
I guess it was about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night.
So, and Sharon wasn't there.
She was not there, no.
So what did you say to him?
I tried to confront him, and he told me to get off his property. We started getting loud and arguing. So that's when he pushed me, and I hit the back of his bumper. I got up,
So you purposely were in your vehicle, and you.
No, my vehicle was at the foot of the driveway.
Okay.
It was not on his property, but I was on his property in his driveway. He pulled up in his driveway, and that's where the conflict started. And I went to my car, and I got my gun.
But before that, before you got the gun, what did you hope to accomplish by going there? Because Sharon wasn't there. So what did you hope to accomplish when you confronted him? I mean, you're only 19. You probably
Honestly, I
didn't
don't know.
You were 21 at this point. Yeah. So
at that time, I really don't know. I've thought about it for 31 years, and I really don't know.
So you have a confrontation with him, and he's telling you that you're too young for her. But at some point, he puts his hands on you, correct?
Yes.
And so you had a physical confrontation. So what happened? You backed away and then went to your car and got a gun.
Immediately when he pushed me, I hit his back of his bumper. I went to my car and got my gun. And
do you remember what you were thinking that motivated you to get the gun, or you don't remember?
I really don't, Chris.
So you got the gun, and then you turn around, and it's probably a bit of a blur for you, but what do you remember happened next?
I remember the flame out of my gun going off, and I remember him making an awful noise and moaning, and I got in my car and drove straight to my parents' house and called the authorities.
So just back up a second. I'm not going to take you through every detail here. So, right, you hear the awful noises because he's been shot.
Mm-hmm.
How many shots were fired in total?
3 shots.
3 shots. So now you're pretty sure that he's deceased, and you drive off, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Where do you go?
Straight to my parents' house.
And what happened next?
I called the authorities and called them, and I told them I shot, and I think I killed somebody.
Right. So you left the scene, and you told your parents that you just shot and killed somebody. What did they tell you to do?
Call the authorities.
And then, so what happened next? So did you call the authorities?
Yes.
You called the police, and who answered?
Dispatcher talked on the line, and she asked me questions. I don't even know the details of the questions. I just remember that at one point I heard someone on the other line say they're there, and then she said, "Well, Anthony," she says, "step outside with your hands up."
So you're on the phone with the police dispatcher, kind of it, right? And what she's doing, she's keeping you on the phone, and just asking you questions and telling you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So now, she send an ambulance over to Rodney's house?
I'm assuming they did, because I remember someone cutting on the line saying that they're there, but didn't hear any details of who was there or what was there.
Okay, now your parents are outside on the front lawn at this point?
My father is, but my mother was in the house with me.
And what was their demeanor like? Were they...
Well, when the dispatcher told me to put the phone down and don't hang up and step outside with my hands up, I started to. My mother started bawling and crying and telling me, don't go out there. And I'm like, I got to go out there, stay in here. And then I walked out there, and there was police officers with the guns and
How many
lights.
police cars?
I want to say 4. I really don't remember the details. A lot of it was blurred, but I want to say there was 4. I know there was one particular right there, in the driveway.
Yeah, and they had their guns drawn?
Yes.
Yeah.
And flashlights, because it was nighttime.
And where was your father at this point?
He was in the driveway too.
He was in the driveway? Was he standing next to you?
No, he was. Like I said, I walked out the door, and there was a little porch, and then there was grass, to the driveway.
And the police were right there.
Right.
So then they come up and they handcuff you, and then they take you to Volusia County Jail.
Yes.
What was that like for you? You're 21 years old. You had never really been arrested before, had you?
Well, just the time with overnight in the jail for the marijuana.
Yeah.
They had taken me in a room, and there was an investigator. The investigator happened to be the same investigator that investigated my grandfather's incident.
So you had met him before?
I had not met him, but later down, his name was Bob Vale. I remember that, but.
And he said, "Hey, I just investigated a guy named Venezia."
No, he didn't. He didn't. I don't remember. Honestly, the whole time I was in there, I don't remember it.
You said the first 2 weeks of county jail was rough. Talk about that.
Well, you go through an orientation. Back then, they smoked in there, so in orientation you didn't smoke. So you had to go through classification and certification. There was no visits, and there was a point where the second night that I was there, I was sleeping, and I got tapped on the foot, and the guy woke me up saying, "Hey, you're on the news." And I just I remember not wanting to go out there, and I didn't go out there. I didn't want to see it, and I just stayed in my bed and just laid there.
It's funny. It's not funny. I use funny as a word that means odd. But what's interesting is that so many of the men that I meet at Everglades Correctional Institutions, Corrections Transition Program, they really can't believe they're the same person that did what they did 20, 25, 30, 40 years earlier. Can you believe that, looking back, that you're the same person that did that?
Mr. Wolf, I'm going to tell you something. For 31 years and 4 days, I've tried to figure out a lot of things. And I can't believe the things that I've done. But one of the things that Dr. Sherman teaches is that we're not the same person.
Right. People change.
That we're changed people. And I believe in God, and I believe in the devil, and I believe sometimes the devil tries to distort my thinking. But I can't believe it.
You look back and you can't believe that you were the same person.
I can't believe that. Like I said, I don't have answers then. I didn't have answers for 31 years, and I still don't have some of the answers today. I know that I did what I did. I was remorseful from the beginning. I called the authorities, and I just know that I'm living the life today of the man I need to be and want to be today, and who I should have been.
How did Sharon, your former girlfriend, how did she find out what happened?
Oh, I called her from the county jail, and she.
What did you say?
She asked me what I was calling from the county jail for, and I told her, I said, I just, I'm what I was in for. I was in for murder and murder for Rodney Wood, and she turned around and she hung up. And then about 2 weeks later, I called back, and from that point on, she was, coming out and visiting me, and
yeah. From the first time you spoke to her, how much time had elapsed from the time that you shot Rodney? couple days?
I think it was the next day or
The
the
next
next 2
day.
days.
She just hung up on you when you told her?
Yeah.
Did you think she knew before you told her?
Well, in her voice, it didn't sound like it. No.
Okay. How violent was Volusia County Jail? You're 21 years old. Was it a violent place?
Yes, I was in the max heavy department, which is the custody was the maximum, and so there was a lot of fights going on, a lot of physical altercations. I got in a couple myself, defending myself, and it was pretty rough.
Yeah, I believe you told me a story about somebody who was basically picking on you, antagonizing you, and some of the guys that were there said, you know, Anthony, you got to make a statement. You got to stand up to this guy. What happened?
Well, I had been sitting in this. There's 20 men per quad, and there are 16 chairs that sit and eat. So I'm sitting there for a month. I've been in the quad, and guy comes up. He got moved in there a day or so, and he walked by me and he told me that was his seat. And I just looked at him and said, okay, whatever, and I ate. So guys were telling me, said, hey man, you know, he's gonna start some trouble with you. You better make a stand. So at dinner time, I made sure I was the first one to get my tray, and I sat in the same seat. And he came by mumbling something. So now I felt that uncomfortable feeling, and it was going on for a couple weeks. And then one day, finally, everybody was gone, and it was just me watching TV in the quad. And he come and sit at the table with me. There's 4 tables there, and he sat at the table right across. And I had my headphones on, and I was just sitting there tapping an envelope, and he snatched out the envelope out of my hand, and my reflexes were to stand up. And when he did, he came and tried to scoop me.
Well, what does that mean, scoop you?
Well, he tried to.
Like to lift you up and tackle you?
Right, yeah, pick my legs up. And it just so happened there was a bar right there, so I grabbed the bar, and I grabbed him. And I was sitting there holding him, and the officer's like, Venezia, let him go, Venezia, let him go. And I'm like, and I'm really not wanting to be in this position, but I'm in this position. And make a long story short, he finally grabbed my hair, which
My hair was a little longer back then?
Yes, so I cut my hair after that, but he grabbed my hair and it was bending my head, so I kind of tapped him a couple times to try again. But by that time, what they call the goon squad showed up.
The guards pull you apart.
Right, and that was it.
So apparently, a number of the corrections officers knew the victim, Rodney Wood, and you were spoken to a couple times about people saying, hey, you know, we got our eye on you. You know, he was a good guy. We're supposed to get you to the courthouse dead or alive. We don't care if you're dead, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a couple guards there. I remember going down and they, because the silverware there, you'd have to turn in every night. You get your silverware, you turn in every night. And when I went to turn in one night, one of the guards named Officer Snyder, I believe it was, he says, we don't like you or something like that. You know,
right.
we knew Rodney and blah, blah, blah. And then a couple times I was being escorted for a visit. You know, I had a couple of them ask me, why'd you do it and stuff like that. And I just knew that I had to keep my mouth closed because I was scared, you know.
Of course. Now, okay, so now we move ahead to the trial. Now, the trial was pretty quick. It only lasted 4 days. How long were you in county jail?
I was in the county jail about 11 months.
11 months.
Which is really quick for a murder charge.
Yeah, I mean, today it would be 1.5 years, 2 years at least, right?
Even back then.
Even back then.
Mm-hmm.
So you go to trial, but your trial only lasts 4 days, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you have a good lawyer?
Well,
it was a guy named Michael Lambert.
Michael
correct?
Lambert.
Tell me about him.
I'm gonna say he was a good lawyer.
Okay.
But he didn't have much to work with, so.
Right. So he was a private lawyer that your parents were paying for.
Yes.
So you were okay with the defense, as you're saying, he worked with what he had.
Yes.
Had you confessed when the police took you in? Did you confess to the police without the presence of a lawyer?
Well, they read me my rights and all, and I told them what happened. You know, I mean, I called them and told them what happened.
Oh.
Told them on the phone what happened.
So I guess there was no lawyer present when you basically admitted.
Right, and so, you know, I didn't really know. Like I said, I was going through a lot of emotions at the time. I wasn't very aware at the time. I was scared, hurt, angry, and
Your lawyer wanted a change of venue, correct?
yes.
Why?
Well, because there's a man by the name of John Tanner,
Okay.
and John Tanner was my lawyer's partner. So for 6 months, my lawyer represented my lawyer was Tanner and Lambert. And then January comes along, and Tanner got elected for prosecutor, state prosecutor.
Okay. Okay. So he just thought it would be best if you changed venue.
Right.
But they denied the change of venue, correct?
No, they actually allowed it, and I got a lawyer out of John Moran out of Duval County.
So they moved it to Jacksonville.
No, they brought the prosecutor to Volusia.
Huh. Okay. Oh, okay. So they didn't really change the venue. They just changed the attorney.
Right. And
Did Michael Lambert stay on the case at all?
Michael Lambert stayed there all the way to my trial and all the way to the end. Tanner, on the other hand, he's the one that introduced my father to Michael Lambert.
Gotcha.
And he said, listen, my partner, I can't run. I'm running for prosecutor, so I can't take any more cases. But my partner,
Michael
can.
Lambert can.
And that's how he hired him.
So you were okay with the lawyers in the defense. Did Sharon, your former girlfriend, did she testify against you?
She was a state witness, yes.
So and what did she say?
Well, she just told him the whole story, how it was that we were living together, that she decided she felt bad about it, honestly.
Were your parents at the trial?
Yes, my whole family. Your
whole family? I think you told me there were about 30 family members at the trial?
Right.
Was the victim's family at the trial?
I'm assuming my sisters told me that there was only like, a couple people there. I believe his daughter were there or something. I don't know. I don't even know if he has a daughter.
Did you ever think that there was any chance you would get a not guilty verdict?
Well, I thought it was going to be second degree.
Well, that's another thing. Michael Lambert or Mr. Moran, they tried to get it changed from first degree to second degree.
John Tanner.
Oh, the first guy.
John Tanner told my family, second degree, he'll do 8 years, no problem. He'll be home.
But why didn't they give you a second degree?
Because they changed the prosecutor. He said now that he was prosecuting me, there was a conflict of interest.
Okay.
So he couldn't, hold up to it. And my father was kind of livid about that. My family was upset about it.
Okay, so originally the prosecutor was going to go second degree, and then they changed prosecutors, from Duval County, and that one went for first degree.
Well, Chris, this is exactly how it happened. Tanner was a lawyer.
Right.
And then 6 months he was representing me. So now the next 5 months he was a prosecutor prosecuting me. So that was the conflict of interest. My lawyer came and said, let's get a change of whatever venue.
I got you. Okay.
And that's where John Moran came from.
But
Duval
the bottom
County.
line is they weren't going to change it to second degree, and they were coming after you for first degree murder. So the jury deliberated only about 2 hours?
Yes, sir.
And
which is quick also.
Which is quick, 'cause that's usually a bad sign, correct? So what happens? So the jury comes back in, they say, we find the defendant guilty. Did the judge sentence you right away?
Right then and there.
And what was that like? You're 21 years old, and they make you stand, correct? And the judge says, I sentence you to life in prison with 25 years mandatory? I mean, what was going through your mind at that point?
Honestly, I didn't even know what the sentence really meant. Actually, I went through my whole sentence not knowing what the sentence meant. When they said life, I thought I was going to do life. I thought I was going to die in prison. Never knew that I was eligible for parole. Never knew that I would get out on parole. So,
apparently, the media was following this story, correct? Because it involved a guy, and he was in love with a woman, and so the media was following this. And I think you said that they printed Deltona man stalking lady, which really wasn't the case, correct?
Absolutely not.
Talk about that.
Well, I was living with her, and because she was renting a place, but we lived together from 86 to 88, and and
Right, and you caught her cheating on you.
Yeah.
And right, you wanted some closure on this, and it just escalated way beyond what you wanted it to.
right.
And the media also reported, apparently, as you were led out of the courtroom, you looked at your parents and mouthed the words, "I love you."
Right.
And the media wrote that you ignored your parents and said, "I love you" to
Correct.
this woman, Sharon. And that was not true, correct?
Absolutely not. She was on the other side of the whole place.
Interesting story. You mentioned to me. So here you are. You're found guilty. The judge sentenced you to life in prison. You know you're going to prison. But you shared something with me that your father was a pretty, not violent guy, but he was a drinker, and you had told me that when you were young, he set an example for you where somebody owed him money, and he took you with him at a very young age. You were 13, and he had a gun with him. And he went, and you witnessed him basically get money from somebody that owed him money, correct?
Right. At the age of 13, there was a guy that my dad had a little sandwich shop, and a couple of the trash guys would come and credit stuff up for him. And this one gentleman, he was a pretty big guy, but he owed my dad some money. And all I remember that night, and I didn't know what was going on until my father said, "Come on," and we went, and I still didn't know what was going on. We went to the movie theater. He went up there and talked to him, and that's when I seen him with his pocket out, and he was, telling the guy,
Did he pull the gun out and pointed at the guy?
No, he had it in his pocket jacket, and he says,
Could the guy see it? You don't know. You were 13.
Right, I was 13. I wasn't even thinking. All I remember was being scared, and I remember I said, "Man," but the guy, he says, "Mr. V, I'll pay you the money." He said, "No, you're gonna pay me now." And the guy got in his car, and we followed him to his house, and he got the money.
That's quite an example to set. So fast forward here, you're age 22, you're not 13 anymore. 1989, you go to prison, Florida State prisons, not Florida State prison, but you're in the Florida State prison system for the very first time. Which correctional institution did you go to first?
Baker Correctional in 1989, I got there.
And that was part of a triangle with Union and Florida State, correct? Very violent prisons?
Yes. Most violent ones went to FSP, which is Florida State Prison, and UCI, The Rock. And when they did their little time there, if they were good, they would get out and usually filter through Baker. So Baker was getting a lot of a lot of dangerous guys, but it was still kind of laid back. But that was where they were, if you're going to get out of that triangle, that's the avenue out.
And you were there 6.5 years.
Yes, sir.
How violent was it back in 1989 through 1995?
Honestly, it was up to you, the individual. I mean, you could get into stuff. I mean, it was violent. There was violence there if you were looking for trouble. If you kept your nose clean and didn't get into different things, drugs, homosexuality, gambling, then you're all right. But
a lot of the guys say that. They come on this show and they say, if you 95% of all the problems in prison is caused by homosexual activity, drugs, gambling, or borrowing and loaning money to people.
Right.
Is that true?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of guys, they'll go and borrow money and get in debt, and then that's where, they'll either put pressure on for the sex, or they will, the guy will check in, and then, which is protective custody, and then they get shipped to another institution, or vice versa, or they both.
When you say check in, so if somebody feels threatened that they're going to be forced into some unwanted homosexual activity, they check in, go to protective custody.
Correct.
And then they get shipped off to another prison.
Correct.
So, and you said you called it a game that people play, is that some of these predators will purposely get people in debt.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens? Somebody owes somebody $250. How does that turn into sex? Unwanted sex?
They apply pressure, I guess. I knew a guy, a friend of mine actually, I didn't think nothing of it. He wanted some money, and I gave him some money, and next thing I know, I had a guy approach me and say, "Hey, what are you getting in my business for?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" "Oh, we're trying to do this." I said, "Well, I don't know. I'm fresh in the system. I don't know."
Right.
I was just being, at the age of 21, I was being
right.
friends
Don't
with
loan him money. I'll loan him money so he gets into debt with me, and then I can have my way.
Right.
So you do 6.5 years at Baker Correctional, and then you're transferred to actually Hardy Correctional Institution. What was the differences between Baker and Hardy?
Well, when I got to Hardy, it was close management, which is CM. So you had some violent people there as well. They were locked down, but the population was lower, and you didn't have many fights there. There was more stabbings than fights there. But again, if you weren't looking for trouble, you could avoid it.
Let's talk a little bit about your transition out, because now you've been in prison almost 30 years at this point. And how did you get into? How were you finally accepted to the Corrections Transition Program at Everglades Correctional Institution?
Well, it started in 2012. I had my initial hearing, parole hearing. They gave me a PPRD, which is a presumptive parole release date of June of 18. And they sent me to Wakulla, and they would come back and see me in 5 years. So I went to Wakulla, did my 2 years there, and I did what I was supposed to do, plus more. I went and put in a good adjustment to Sumter Correctional. I did their lifers program so I wouldn't have to be sent there by the parole commission.
But weren't you originally supposed to get out in 2033, and then like sort of divine intervention, your dad prayed and you prayed, and they gave you a 2018?
Well, what happened is during my first hearing, I went to the law books and I calculated what I thought it was going to be.
Oh, okay.
And by the time they aggravated all my sentence, I was thinking from the day of my parole hearing, it was going to be like 2030 something.
Okay, so it was less divine intervention, a little more research on your part.
And then they turned around and they gave me a good date. But you said something about prayer. It was funny. My roommate and I at the time of my first hearing, it was 10 minutes to 12. I'll never forget. And he said, "Man, let's pray about it." And we prayed about it right there in the room. His name was Dredd. And Dredd and I prayed.
At 11:50 a.m.
Well, at 10 minutes till is when I said, well, when I called my father says, at 11:50 a.m., they were having a hearing. And they gave me a 2018 date, which I was dumbfumbled. And I was like, man, so I went back to my room. I said, hey, man, my dad said 11:50. And Dredd said, hey, man, that's when we were praying about it.
That's the divine intervention. All right, we've got a few minutes left, so I want to get through your transition. So on your subsequent second parole hearing, you're sent to CTP at CTP, Corrections Transition Program at Everglades Correctional Institution. And you have your first experience with our co-founder, Dr. Regina Sheeran. What did she say to you?
She asked what my charge was. She asked me how old I was, and I told her first-degree murder, and I told her I was at that time, she asked me how long I'd been locked up. I said 29 years at that time. She said, 29 years? You don't look old enough to be 29 years. And I'm in front of a bunch of students and other inmates, and I turned around.
About 100 inmates, right?
Yes, sir. And I turned around and looked at her, I said, well, thank you. And everybody broke out laughing.
Tell me something. What did you have learned from Dr. Sheeran that you'll never forget? I think there was two things you talked about.
One is that I don't have to like an individual,
but you've got to respect them.
But I've got to respect them.
Even I remember that, and I wasn't technically, in the program like you were. Right. You don't have to like everybody, but you have to respect them. And the second thing was, you must believe.
You must believe that you're going to get out, that you're going to make parole. You got to believe it.
That's what you remember from Dr. Sheeran. Here's a question for you. I used to ask this to all the guys at the Voices of Time Gavel Club. What do you say to people listening to this show who say, why should you have gotten paroled when you killed this guy? He's dead. Why should you be paroled?
Well, that's a two-sided coin right there, Chris, because if you asked the man that I was, I'd have said I shouldn't be paroled.
Right.
But today I'm looking because I'm a productive citizen.
You paid your debt to society?
I don't know. I think I'm still paying it. I'm giving back. I'm able to give back to the community now.
Yeah, you talked about trusting the process. right? Because on your third hearing, they put you off for another year, and you were very, very disappointed. And you gave a speech in a speech contest that I put up called Trusting the Process.
Yes.
And that paid off because your fourth parole hearing was coming up, and you gave that speech. But all of a sudden, you find out there's some judicial opposition, and your sister was instrumental in helping you. Talk about that. We got a few minutes left.
She actually, when I found out about a week before, I got scared and nervous and panicked, and I called her and I said, "Listen, this is what we got to do." So, she went and they spoke with the commission the day before the hearing, and because I had already got it taken care of supposedly, and she went and they said that it's still on.
The opposition.
The opposition said, Ms. Coonrod said that we are not going against
A judge.
A judge. And so she contacted the judge, and that I'm talking about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And the lady said, "Oh, we already sent the recommendation." She said, "Well, they don't have it, and can you fax it?" So the judge's secretary faxed it to the parole commission. The parole commission processed it like 4:45, right before 5 o'clock. And the next morning when they went in there, it was dropped.
Wow, that was instrumental on her part.
Oh yeah.
So you were then paroled. You were released on. But that was down to the wire. So you were paroled on July 2nd of 2019. You went to Noah's transition house in Tampa.
Yes, sir.
And now you actually have your own mobile home in Tampa. I've seen a picture of it. It's beautiful.
I'm renting, yes.
And you've got a job that you're making a great living and benefits, feeding Tampa Bay.
Yes, sir.
Talk about that for about 60 seconds.
Well, they gave me an opportunity. I'm serving the community. I made $38,000 last year.
Wow.
And I'm just serving the community. I deliver food to food banks and such, and that's what I'm doing.
Okay.
Very grateful.
Dr. Sheeran has a special rule, all right? And I know you're smiling when I say this, because she always tells the men, you did 30 years in prison. You're in no position to be in a relationship with a member of the, well, same or opposite sex. You're in no position to be in a relationship. And that is a hard rule. No relationships for 2 years. And I know you don't want to break that rule, but tell me, is there anybody out there of any interest? Because you're coming up on the 2 years.
Well, Chris, I'm going to say this here. There may be a person of interest.
There may be.
There may be.
All right. Tell me, what's next for Anthony Venezia?
Well, I'm hoping to get approved to go into the prisons. I want to go back in there and share. I want to make a bridge between the gap. I want to let the men know inside that if you're doing the right thing, you can succeed out here. And there's opportunities out here for men like myself. I also want to reach the society and let them know inevitably we're getting out. We need help. So I'm hoping to bridge that gap. I've been going to churches and giving testimony, and I've gone to a couple of prisons and shared. So I'm hoping to do that more on a regular basis.
Right, and I know you're very active in helping the men who are still in prison, and I think you're also involved with sometimes driving them from Miami to Tampa when they're paroled, correct?
Yes, sir. And I also, if a guy doesn't have family or money, I'll get a cell phone, and I'll put a $25 plan on it. And I'll put the parole officer's, community control officer's phone number on it, and I'll send it to the parole officer so that immediately when they get out that they're connected.
That's
because
great.
If they don't have family or money, it's going to be difficult, and I want to make sure that they're connected immediately.
That's fantastic. Listen, we're all very proud of you. Anytime you're in Miami, you come back, you join us on Men Going Home, and please come back.
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, that does it for today, and thank you all so much for tuning in for another episode of Men Going Home. Special thanks to Bob Hanlon in Philadelphia, Barbara Kearns Aubrey in Georgia, and Amy Donner right here in Miami. Thank you all so much for watching and letting us know you're enjoying these episodes. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you all next week here on Men Going Home.